She handed me a ribboned box like it meant something. Not a card, not a smile, just a silent drop onto the dining table as if she'd checked off an obligation. Celine didn't even look me in the eye. Elias trailed behind her eyes, fixed on his phone. He mumbled, "Happy birthday, Mom," but his hug never came. I smiled anyway. 67. Another year. Another chance to pretend things were fine. The table was set for coffee and cake, my own doing, of course. The others had already arrived, my neighbor Cassie with her twins and old friends from the bookshop. We made small talk while the kettle boiled. Elias stayed mostly silent. Celine scrolled through photos on her phone, probably some staged vacation shot for her followers. Palm trees, staged smiles. Curated joy. Then Nadine walked in. Drenched in floral perfume and clinking gold bracelets, she greeted everyone like a talk show host. "Happy birthday, darling," she sang, air-kissing both my cheeks. I almost choked on the hairspray cloud she carried, and in that moment, pure instinct, I reached for the chocolate box, still sitting untouched, and handed it to her. "Something sweet from Celine," I said lightly. Nadine raised a thin eyebrow, but smiled, accepting the gift as if it were hers all along. She opened the box with flair, plucked a dark truffle, and popped it into her mouth without hesitation. The conversation drifted. Cake was cut. Coffee poured. The kettle let out one sharp whistle that no one acknowledged. It was 30 minutes later, just as I brought in another pot of coffee, that we heard the crash. A sharp shatter followed by Cassie's gasp. I turned toward the kitchen. Nadine was on the floor, her arms splayed toward the counter, a wine glass in pieces beside her. Her legs twitched. Her eyes rolled back. I dropped the pot. Someone screamed for help. Elias froze. Celine stood still, white as porcelain. And then she turned to me, not in panic, not in fear, but with a single breathless question. "Did you eat any?" The sirens pierced the quiet like knives. I watched from the doorway as two paramedics carried Nadine out on a stretcher oxygen mask strapped to her face, her limbs still trembling. Celine hovered nearby, biting at her perfectly polished thumbnail, glancing between Nadine and me like she couldn't decide which direction to run. Elias said nothing. He kept his distance, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "She has low blood sugar sometimes." Celine offered, suddenly voice too loud. Maybe she skipped lunch or her words tangled mid-sentence, breaking into a cough that felt rehearsed. The paramedics didn't look convinced. One of them asked if she'd eaten anything unusual. I opened my mouth, then stopped. Celine looked at me like a deer cornered by headlights. "Just a chocolate," I said finally. "One truffle from the box Celine brought." The pause that followed felt like 100 years. Celine stepped closer. "Did you eat any of them?" she asked. Too casual, too careful. Her voice trembled in a way that didn't match her face. "No," I said. "I gave them to Nadine." Celine exhaled, but it wasn't relief for her mother. It was something colder. She nodded, turned her back, and walked out to the ambulance without another word. By the time everyone left, the cake was stale, the coffee cold, and I couldn't remember blowing out a single candle. That night, I undressed slowly, the house too silent around me. I went to prepare my medication the same way I had every evening for years, 7 little compartments in a plastic box, each labeled by day. Monday's was already open. That wasn't right. I checked the bottle beside it, my heart medication, and felt the chill start in my fingertips. The pills weren't the same shade. They were duller, almost gray. These weren't mine. My hands started to tremble. I sat down before my knees could buckle. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch scraped against the kitchen window. Inside, I opened every cabinet, every drawer. And behind the coffee tin, tucked near the back, was something I didn't recognize. A small glass vial. No label, half full. I used to believe that if you gave everything to your child, they'd grow into someone who'd never let you down. Back then, I worked double shifts at Whitmore's Books. I'd open the shop before the sun rose, restock the shelves, ring up regulars, then close up just in time to catch the bus for the evening cleaning job. I still remember falling asleep on the lumpy couch in the front room, a heating pad tucked beneath my spine just to give Elias the bigger bedroom during his high school years. He needed space to study, to grow. That's what I told myself. When his tuition came due and the grants didn't cover everything, I sold my first edition of The Great Gatsby, the copy with the misprint on page 29. I dreamed of passing it on to someone who'd treasure it. But Elias needed it more. At least that's what I thought then. And then came Celine. At first, she was all honeyed charm smiles that stretched too wide, compliments that never quite touched ground. "You raised such a gentleman," she'd say, clinging to Elias's arm. "You're such an inspiration, Marcia." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she loved him the way I had. But it didn't take long for that charm to curdle into control. After the wedding, Elias stopped calling. Birthdays turned into short texts. Holidays were too hectic. I'd invite them for dinner only to hear silence for weeks. I knew it was her. I just didn't want to admit it. The worst moment came one evening after a church fundraiser. I'd stopped by their house to drop off some photos. I didn't mean to overhear. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard her say it. "She's old. She'll be gone soon. The house will be ours." She laughed. Elias didn't respond. I stood outside their door for a full minute, waiting for him to defend me. He never did. I closed the door softly behind me that night, and when I got home, I sat in the dark for hours, listening to the ticking clock over the fireplace. The hospital waiting room smelled like bleach and canned air. I sat across from the vending machine, hands folded in my lap, while Celine paced 2 feet away, pretending not to glance at her phone. Nadine was stable, they said. Conscious but weak. The doctor spoke in low tones, careful words. Traces of Brodifacoum rat poison found in her bloodstream. "It's used in some commercial rodenticides," he said. "But this level, someone had to put it there. No one else had touched the chocolates. I'd offered them. She'd eaten them, and the others were gone. That night after returning home, I opened the trash and dug until I found the box. Empty. But the smell lingered, bitter chemical, faintly metallic. I held it to my nose, then immediately recoiled. I rinsed my hands and stared at the pantry. The vial was exactly where I'd remembered it. Tucked behind the second tin of coffee, my backup canister I rarely used. A small glass container, no label. Not something I'd ever purchased. Not something that belonged. I slipped it into a Ziploc bag, sealed it tight, and placed it in the freezer. Then I sat at the kitchen table, folded my hands again, and stared into the dark. In the morning, I called Dr. Chen's office and made an appointment. I said it was routine. Blood work, medication check-in. Nothing urgent. Then I called Helen, my lawyer of 20 years. Asked if she had time to talk about property matters. She said yes. I said little else. I arrived at her office with a tote bag and calm voice. Inside the bag, the vial, the pill bottle with the swapped medications, and my updated list of emergency contacts minus Elias. Helen didn't ask many questions. She didn't have to. I told her I wanted everything on record. A living trust, medical directives, property protections, and a clause I'd never needed before full disinheritance with justification. When I left her office, the sky was gray and heavy. Rain would come soon. I went straight to the pharmacy and bought a new lockbox for my medicine. The phone rang just after 8. I let it buzz twice before picking up. Celine's name lit the screen too bright against the dark of my kitchen. "Hey," she said, voice thin and stretched. "Just checking in. How are you feeling?" I could hear music in the background. Not a hospital room. Not worry. Something else. "I'm fine," I said. A pause. Then flatly, I added, The police have the chocolate box now. Silence. A long, hollow second where I could almost hear her blinking, then a soft click. She didn't say goodbye. I stood there with the receiver still warm in my hand, watching the reflection of myself in the window. A woman holding nothing. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the folder Helen had prepared. Everything was in order. I read through it slowly, deliberately, signing page after page as the clock ticked past midnight. The house was now placed in a trust ironclad protected. No one could touch it without my say. I revoked Elias's designation as next of kin. I removed him from my emergency contact list. His name vanished from the will like chalk in rain. I left in place a note legally binding, explaining my decision, dated and signed. I didn't need to scream it. I just needed it documented. I turned off the lights, walked upstairs, and paused at the landing. A framed photo of Elias as a boy still sat on the hallway shelf. 7 years old, gap-toothed, holding up a trophy I'd driven 3 hours to watch him win. I picked it up, stared into the eyes of someone I used to know, and gently placed it face down. Sleep didn't come easy. My body was still, but my mind flickered like a dying bulb. Every memory now felt like a trick mirror bent at the edges, blurred in the center. By morning, I had made one more call to Helen. I want the amendment to include a survivorship clause, I told her. If anything happens to me, I want nothing reverting to my son or his wife. Not 1 cent. Not ever. Cassie met me on her front porch with a tired smile and a mug of coffee in hand. The morning sun hadn't broken through the clouds yet, and the chill hung low around our ankles. I asked if we could talk. Just 5 minutes. She nodded. Come in. The house smelled like cinnamon and wet shoes. One of the twins ran by with a backpack, the other shouted something about missing earbuds. It was real life, loud and unfiltered, and for a moment I missed that noise. Cassie poured me coffee without asking, then sat down across from me, her expression folding into something serious. Lila told me something after the party, she said. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but after what happened, I waited. She saw Celine go into your bathroom right before everyone arrived. Said she looked nervous, like she was in a hurry. Lila didn't think much of it until she heard her say something kind of under her breath as she walked back out. I swallowed. What did she say? She told me. Celine said she won't even taste it, then smiled to herself. I stared into the coffee like it might answer for me. I know Lila's just a kid, but she's sharp, Cassie continued. She doesn't lie, and she asked me if you were okay last night. She's worried. I am too. I nodded, slowly set the mug down and reached across the table. Would you be willing to write that down? What Lila saw. What she heard. Cassie didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I thanked her, stood and left through the side yard. The air felt thinner now, my steps more certain. Back home, I unlocked the cabinet near the entryway and opened the small safe that held my backup drives. I took out the one labeled Front Entry, June, plugged it into my laptop, found the timestamp from the afternoon of the party. There she was, Celine, entering the hallway, disappearing toward the guest bath, staying longer than anyone should. I clicked Save As and labeled the file Hallway, Witness Copy. He didn't knock. I heard the door creak open just after noon, followed by the slow tread of shoes I used to know without looking. I stayed seated in the living room, hands folded, the laptop still open beside me. Elias stood in the doorway, pale eyes darting. He looked thinner, or maybe just smaller. Celine said you're accusing her of poisoning her own mother, he said. His voice cracked near the end. I didn't rise. I'm not accusing her, I said. I'm documenting what happened. I turned the screen toward him. Pressed play. He watched as the hallway camera showed Celine entering the guest bath, staying just long enough. Then the printout beside me, Lila's written statement, her neat handwriting, recounting the overheard whisper. She won't even taste it. Then the photos, the open Monday pillbox, the two-toned medication, the vial. He didn't move, just stood there, arms limp, gaze unfocused. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to deny any of it. "She thought it would be fast," he said quietly. "Clean, peaceful. You wouldn't have even known. You would have just slipped away." I felt something in me go silent. Not rage, not heartbreak, just stillness. "She," I asked. He looked at me then. No apology, no panic. Just a long, hollow look like he was trying to recognize me across a distance too wide. "I didn't agree to it," he said, "but I didn't stop her either. That was the truth. And it was worse than a lie." I stood slowly, walked to the bookshelf, took down the folder Helen had prepared, handed him a single sheet. He read it. His lips parted. "This says you've removed me." "I have," I said. "Fully." He stood there for another beat, then folded the paper in half, careful not to crease it. "I guess you don't want to talk about this anymore." I looked at him, my son and not my son, and shook my head once. "I think we've said enough." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw things or slam doors. There was no scene, no shouting match, no final plea. I simply got dressed the next morning, packed a folder, and drove to Helen's office. She was already waiting, a fresh set of documents spread neatly across her desk. I signed the new deed without hesitation, transferring full ownership of the house not to a stranger, but to my cousin, Lenora. She lived out west, quiet life, 2 cats, and a gentle soul. Years ago, after my knee surgery, she came, without being asked, stayed for 2 weeks, and brought fresh flowers every morning. I never forgot that. I placed the pen down and slid the folder back across the table. Helen looked at me with something between pity and admiration. "Do you want to include a final note to them?" she asked. "No, just make it legal." From there, I drove to the precinct. Walked in without shaking. Told them I wanted to file a formal report regarding tampering and suspected poisoning. I handed over the vial, the pill bottle, the witness statement, the footage on a flash drive. The officer didn't question my clarity. He just wrote everything down and said a detective would be in touch soon. By the time I returned home, the locksmith had finished. Every deadbolt was changed, every key remade. I walked through each room like I was seeing it all for the first time, only now it was mine again. Not because a paper said so, but because I'd claimed it back. Upstairs, I sat at the writing desk in the guest room, took out 1 sheet of heavy cardstock and wrote in blue ink, "Elias, you are no longer welcome here. Please don't return. Mom." I folded it clean and placed it in the mailbox, right where he'd find it before even reaching the door. Then I turned off the lights, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat in the garden with a blanket over my legs as the wind moved through the hydrangeas. The investigation moved quietly, without spectacle. No flashing lights, no loud knocks at the door. Just phone calls, subpoenas, silence, stretching longer each day. Celine was placed on leave from her job at the clinic. Pending review, they said, though everyone knew what that meant. Her supervisor, an old acquaintance of mine, called one morning just to ask if I was okay. Her tone said more than her words. Elias's accounts were frozen a week later, pending financial review, something to do with insurance access and a flagged power of attorney form he'd apparently submitted months ago without telling me. He hadn't even waited until I was dead. Their marriage began to show its fractures in public. A neighbor spotted them arguing in a grocery store parking lot. Celine was crying. Elias looked cornered. The same neighbor later told Cassie, who told me that Elias had been staying at a motel just outside town. Meanwhile, Nadine recovered slowly. She reached out through Cassie, never directly to me, and confirmed she hadn't asked Celine to bring chocolates. I didn't even know she had a gift, she'd told the nurse. Groggy, but clear. She said they were from Marcia. That was all I needed to hear. The whispers started not long after. Small town truths have a way of trickling down like coffee through a paper filter. Slow, dark, and hard to ignore. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. One afternoon, I found myself at the garden window with a fresh cup of coffee, the steam curling into the air. The backyard was quiet. No footsteps, no strained laughter, no tension curled beneath my ribs. I watched a squirrel dart across the stone path and disappear into the hedge. In the stillness, I felt something I hadn't recognized in years, peace, not just quiet. Not long after, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single folded receipt. A hotel booking. Elias's name. 4 nights. I placed it in a drawer without a word. The next morning, I called Helen again and asked her to finalize the survivorship clause. The light comes in differently now. Warmer. Uninterrupted. It pours through the kitchen window in the morning and rests on the tiles like it's always belonged there. I adopted a dog last week. A quiet mutt with graying fur and one ear that won't stay up. They called him Murphy. He follows me from room to room without barking, just content to be close. We're a good match that way, quiet company, no demands. I repainted the kitchen in soft ivory, covered the old scuffs with something clean and mine. The walls don't remember what was said here, only what's coming next. The birthday card from Cassie's twins is still pinned to the fridge, handmade, full of glitter and crooked hearts. One of them drew me with a cape. Super Marcia, it says in pink marker. Elias hasn't called, not once. I no longer wonder why. Celine's court date is scheduled for early fall. I won't attend. The police have everything they need. The file is thick and precise. My job is done. I don't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory. It was survival. But I do feel free. The house is mine again, not just in deed or law, but in energy, in breath. I water my garden without fear of who might show up. I leave the porch light off and sleep soundly anyway. This morning, I sat at the desk in the guest room and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Not for a lawyer, not for a court. For me, I wrote Marcia. You waited for someone to save you. But you did it yourself. That's all the closure you need. I folded it, sealed it, and tucked it into the back of my journal. Then I took Murphy out to the garden, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat under the shade of the old elm tree. The wind moved through the leaves like it was telling a story I finally understood.